Gwinnett County Magistrate Court conducting preliminary hearings by way of Zoom video conferencing. This is a result of the Supreme Court Justice's order suspending all in-person court proceedings due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The matters before the court today are the state of Georgia versus Jalen Halsey. Mr. Halsey is represented by Attorney Cheyenne, and the state of Georgia versus Antonio Elam, represented by Attorney Lawrence Lewis. And on behalf of the state, Assistant District Attorney Amina Bakari. Jalen Halsey is charged on warrant number 20W13556 with violation of the Georgia Controlled Substance Act, sale of narcotics, and also on warrant number 20W13557, possession of a drug-related object, and warrant number 20W13558, possession of a firearm during a felony, and warrant number 20W13559, possession of marijuana with the intent to distribute. Mr. Antonio Elam is charged on warrant number 20W13547 with distribution of amphetamine salts. Warrant number 20W13551, possession of a drug-related object. Warrant number 20W13549, he is charged with possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. And then on warrant number 20W13550, he's charged with failure to maintain lane. And on warrant number 20W13548, he's charged with violation of Georgia Controlled Substance Act, possession of marijuana with the intent to deliver. So Mr. Halsey on warrant number 20W13556, he is charged with distribution of amphetamine salts. Are those the charges the state is proceeding under? And if not, please correct the court.
What was that last warrant number you had?
The last warrant number, I just went back over 20W13556. It's violation of the Georgia Controlled Substance Act, sale of amphetamine salts and not narcotics.
Yes, amphetamine salts, correct.
Okay. All right, Assistant DA, Kari, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. We have Officer Branning. If you please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in both of these matters will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Can you please state your name?
Officer Brendan Branning.
And how are you employed?
I'm employed with the City of Lawrenceville Police Department.
Are you post certified?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
And did you take out the warrants on both of the defendants in this hearing?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Can you tell us how that came to be?
Yes, ma'am. I was on routine patrol on that date, monitoring our newly installed flock cameras, which are installed in several locations throughout the system. They capture tags and tag violations. I was dispatched to a noise complaint call and had pulled out from a business across the street from 474 West Pike Street, one of our known extended stays that's pretty well known for narcotic dealings and prostitution. I had saw a vehicle that was occupied by 5 subjects pull out of there and actually head in the same exact direction that I did. It was clear they saw that my marked unit was right next to them, so they dropped their speed to about 28 miles an hour and slowed down at a heavy rate to slow down in order to allow me to go past them. I was able to run their tag and notice that the tag came from Fulton County, which was a little strange to me, especially at that time of day. While riding next to them, I could see that there was at least 4 occupants, which turned out to be 5, and the backseat had attempted to kind of conceal their faces. I eventually positioned my vehicle behind the suspect vehicle as it entered into the square. While being positioned behind the vehicle, I began to smell the odor commonly associated with burnt marijuana. It became stronger and stronger. This was the only vehicle in front of me. The vehicle had entered the curve of Krogan Street and Pike Street and failed to maintain lane. At this time, I had disregarded the noise complaint call, had another officer go because I wanted to observe the driving habits of the vehicle, make sure that the subject was not under the influence of marijuana and driving in a less safe manner. The vehicle had entered into the square and turned left onto Culver Street, which was a little odd due to the fact that this would now be positioning them back in the opposite direction that they were traveling in. They turned left at the light when the light turned green and immediately entered the roadway upon the center lane and not the leftmost lane, as the code section would stipulate. Due to the driving habits, this time I did initiate a traffic stop on the vehicle. The vehicle rolled for a period of time and then entered into a taxidermist parking lot, at which time the vehicle had turned itself and been perpendicular to my vehicle, which was a little odd, and I could clearly see there was 5 occupants. All the occupants had began to move around the vehicle, reach towards the floor, towards their sides, sit up, just some odd behavior, so I requested a couple other officers. I exited my vehicle and made my way to the driver's side of the vehicle, at which time I made contact with Mr. Elam. I asked where they were coming from. There wasn't a direct answer. While speaking, I could smell the very strong odor of marijuana and asked Mr. Elam about this. He did openly admit that the group had smoked marijuana. However, he stated there was none left in the car. Once my backup arrived on scene, I had requested Mr. Elam exit the vehicle. A search was conducted of his person due to the fact of his open admission of it being marijuana and the odor of marijuana. I had felt immediately a large quantity of money in his pocket. I asked him how much money he had. He said it was payday and that he had $600. This would later be determined that he had $845, roughly in different denominations of 20s, 10s, and 5s, common occurrence of somebody who is selling narcotics. I began to get the other occupants out of the vehicle. Mr. Holsey was in the back seat with Mr. Kofi and a wisdom subject. As I had Mr. Holsey step out of the vehicle, he was searched immediately and placed in a separate location with the other subjects. The other 2, Mr. Kofi and Mr. Wisdom, were removed from the vehicle. At this time, I could see that Mr. Wisdom had dropped a quantity of marijuana as he exited the vehicle, and there was also a firearm that was loaded with the hammer cocked in the back floorboard within an arm span of all 3 subjects. I ran the information of Mr. Holsey and Mr. Coffey through our dispatch and immediately returned that they had some outstanding warrants. I then went back to the passenger side to a female occupant, Ms. Palmer, and asked her to exit the vehicle. She became increasingly nervous, began to be sweaty. I gave her clear verbal commands to get out of the car. She began to reach around slightly. At this time, I gave her one final clear verbal command to get out of the car, and she was removed from the vehicle. The search was conducted and finished of the vehicle and persons, and underneath the driver's seat was also a glass jar with a scale and a sandwich baggie containing several amphetamine salts or Adderall pills wrapped up in the baggie, some digital scales, another firearm that was loaded under the seat. At this time, all subjects were detained. I read Miranda to the group and asked if anybody wanted to talk with me. Nobody had wanted to talk. They all had then began to argue once I told them what the charges would be about who was going to take the fall, which led me to believe that each party did have direct knowledge of what was inside of the vehicle. After continuously attempting to get somebody to talk to me, all parties did continue to argue about who's going to take the charges, and they attempted to have Ms. Palmer take the charges due to the fact that she had a clean record. This was not going to go that way, so all parties were placed under arrest for the charges and transported to the jail. Once at the jail, Mr. Wisdom had stated that he needed to talk to me, at which time he said he had something inserted or placed near his rectal cavity. We removed a pill bottle containing the same exact amphetamine salt pills that were discovered under the seat of the car.
All right. And the person that you identified as the driver, Mr. Elam, do you see him participating in this video hearing today?
I believe he is with Mr. Lawrence. He's got a mask on. I believe he's with Mr. Lawrence in the jail court.
Yeah, we'll stipulate that.
Thank you. And who you described as a backseat passenger, Mr. Halsey, do you see him participating today?
Yes, ma'am. Jail video court number 1, wearing the green jumpsuit.
Thank you. And if you can just clarify again, the first location where you initially saw the vehicle pull out from, you said that was an extended stay?
Yes, ma'am. It is, I believe it's In-Town Suites. No, it's Hometown Studios now. It's an extended stay within the city where we have a lot of narcotics, prostitution, and loitering issues from.
And what street was that on?
It is, the address is 474 West Pike Street within the city limits of Lawrenceville, Georgia.
And is that within Gwinnett County?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Do you have any specialized training in narcotics investigations?
I just have my years of experience, ma'am, in dealing with it. I have several hundred, if not close to thousands or more narcotics cases that I've dealt with.
Okay. You had you come in contact with the odor of marijuana previously?
Yes, ma'am, I had.
And when you first made contact with the driver, Mr. Elam, you said he admitted that they had previously been smoking. Did he give kind of a time frame of that?
No, ma'am, he did not.
Okay. Did he admit or acknowledge that there was marijuana currently in the vehicle?
I would have to go back to confirm on my body camera if he stated there was or was not. He just did, however, state that the odor was, in fact, marijuana and nothing else.
Okay, so he admitted that the odor you were smelling would be coming from marijuana.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And after having him exit the vehicle, you indicated you did a pat down or a search of his person?
I did a search of his person due to the fact that there was the odor of marijuana and his open admission to it being, in fact, marijuana that I was smelling. There was a search of occupants as well as a search of the vehicle.
Okay. And when you described...
I'm sorry, I apologize. I worked 18 hours yesterday in a training course. There was marijuana located, I believe, in his pocket on his person as well.
Okay. Would you be able to describe about the amount of that or how that was packaged?
A small quantity packaged in a common sandwich bag, not labeled.
Okay. And you described one of the subjects, Mr. Wilson, dropped some marijuana. Did you actually see him drop it or just see it on the ground?
It was a Mr. Wisdom, and yes, I watched him drop it from his person and landed on the seat where Mr. Halsey and Mr. Coffee were sitting as well.
Okay, so that was actually as he was exiting from the vehicle?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. And in reference to Mr. Halsey and Mr. Coffee, I believe they are both convicted felons as well when I ran a criminal history on them.
Okay. And were you able to see where Mr. Wisdom was dropping the marijuana from his person? Where did it start?
All I could see was that it was coming from his leg area. If we weren't on Zoom, I would be able to show it, but he had attempted to conceal it in his hand, and as he got up, act as if he didn't have it, like a quick drop. That's the best way to describe it.
Okay. And can you describe a little more clearly exactly where the first firearm that you located was in the back seat?
The first firearm that was located in the back seat was near the feet of Mr. I believe it was Mr. Mr. Holsey and Mr. Wisdom. It was near their feet, on the ground in the back seat.
Okay. So as far as the occupants in the back, we have Mr. Holsey and Mr. Wisdom. Who was the third occupant in the back?
Mr. Kofi,
Okay.
K-O-F-I, I believe.
And would you recall how they were positioned? Who was sitting in the middle?
Mr. Holsey was sitting in the middle.
Okay. And who would have been behind the driver and passenger?
Mr. Kofi behind the driver and Mr. Wisdom behind the passenger.
All right. And during the further search of the vehicle, you located a glass jar. You said that was under a seat?
Under the passenger seat.
Would that have been, if you can describe, easier access from the rear of the vehicle from the passenger seat, or easier to access from the front of the passenger seat?
I believe it would have been similar access from both rear occupants to front occupant.
Okay. All right. And the scale and the gun, that was all kind of together under the passenger seat?
Yes, ma'am, as well as a couple other sandwich bags.
Containing substance?
There was one that contained more marijuana as well, but there was other sandwich bags that appeared to just be used to refill, or it's a common occurrence when somebody is distributing narcotics that they have extra containers to put their stuff in. It would be somewhere that would be near the scale due to the fact that they could weigh it or distribute it out that way.
Would you be able to approximate the amount of salts that were found in that glass jar?
I apologize. I'm not going to be able to give you the exact amount. It was, I know it was sent to the GBI. I would say more than 20 pills of amphetamine salts would be an honest assumption. I want to say it was upwards of 40 to 50, but I'm not going to swear on any of that without having directly in front of me. I apologize.
Sure. That is helpful. And I just want to clarify, so that would put Palmer in the front passenger seat, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And she would be the only female?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So after everyone was out of the vehicle and the search was completed, did you attempt to read Miranda to any of them or all of them at the same time?
Yes, ma'am. Miranda was read to the group, and nobody wanted to talk.
Were they grouped in patrol vehicles or still outside, just all standing together?
They were outside, ma'am. We were outnumbered. We usually don't have that many officers, so they were kept in a group at that time.
Okay. And so after they invoke their right not to answer any questions, did you advise them of the charges?
Yes, ma'am, I did, at which time there became several spontaneous utterances from the group about somebody better take the fall. Nobody would take the fall. However, all parties admitted knowledge of, through their utterances, the items in the vehicle.
Did they actually list or identify any of those items specifically?
No, ma'am.
Okay, just the items, and they just spoke of them in general.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And were you able to run both of the guns that were located?
No, I was able to run one. It turned back that it was not stolen. The second one, I could not get a clear reading of the serial number on it, so that was sent to our evidence techs to do an e-trace on.
All right, so the marijuana that is based on the charges of intent to distribute, was that what was dropped from Mr. Wisdom?
They were all the packages that were located on Mr. Elam, Mr. Wisdom, and on the ground of the car, all were the same exact package. Due to the fact that they were all similarly packaged, the separate denominations of money, as well as the scale, led me to believe that the subjects were in fact also distributing marijuana as well as the amphetamine salts.
Okay, so there were 3 different bags of marijuana all packaged in the same way.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you estimate the total weight of all 3 of those packages?
They were sent to the GBI. I would somewhere near about an ounce of marijuana, but I'm not going to swear to that under oath without having that directly in front of me. Marijuana's weight can change with packaging and over time too, so just due to the fact that it was separately packaged.
And were they equally distributed, or were some bigger than the others?
They weren't all the same exact size, no, ma'am.
Okay. All right. I believe, were you able to NIC test the salts or the marijuana?
No, ma'am. There's currently no NIC test available from the GBI in reference to marijuana. The amphetamine salts were sent off to the lab for testing, as well as the marijuana was sent off to the lab for testing.
Okay, so as far as the salts, have you had the occasion to observe or be familiar with amphetamine salts prior?
Yes, ma'am, I have. I've had several other arrests involving amphetamine salts, as well as I was able to use a pill identifier from the GBI, a pill identifier sheet, and identify the markings on the pill as amphetamine salts, or commonly known as Adderall.
Okay. All right, I believe that's all the questions I have at this time.
Thank you, Judge. Officer Brannon, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
Okay, I'm doing well. I'm thinking that this hometown suite is right across the street from like Captain D's in Lawrenceville. Is that right?
It is directly across from 481 West Pike Street, a imaging and MRI solution parking lot. But yes, Captain D's is right next door. Yes, sir.
Got it. So when the car comes out of the hometown suite, it makes a right towards the car wash coming towards the center of Lawrenceville. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and if I understand you correctly in terms of the path of travel, it makes a left on Culver Street and at the light, then makes another left back on to, I guess, West Croghan Street. Is that right?
That would be West
Pike?
Yes, sir. That's West Pike there.
I know what a taxidermist is, so that's all I care about. They pulled over near the taxidermist, and at that time, the car was headed in the opposite direction of the direction of travel when you first saw the car. Is that right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, so when you first pulled out, when you first noticed the car, where were you exactly?
I was across the street in the Imaging Solution parking lot working on reports.
Okay, right there near Phoenix High School.
Yes, sir. Phoenix High School would have been on my right.
Okay.
474 would be my right, front,
Okay,
and Captain
good.
East my left.
Okay, good. Now you're traveling. It's a 2-lane road. You're traveling towards the center of Lawrenceville. And are you in the left lane or the right lane? I know it's a 2-lane road.
Left lane, sir.
You're in the left lane. They're in the right lane when they quickly decelerate. I believe that was your testimony, right?
Yes, sir.
At that point in time, and I don't recall, I apologize, September 26th, it's just been relatively warm here in Georgia. Are the windows down or up at that time on the vehicle?
Oh, gosh. I would have to go back and look at my body camera. I apologize.
That's
I've
fine.
off
If you don't know, that's a fine answer. Was the dash cam on in your vehicle at the time?
My dash cam as well as my body camera on. Yes, sir.
Okay, good. At some point in time, the car slows down, and then if I understand your testimony correctly, you slow down in order to get behind the car. Is that right?
Well, when the vehicle slowed down, I did observe that it was occupied by several individuals, and just due to the fact that they started to move around frantically, something that somebody would do if they weren't wearing a seatbelt or attempting to conceal something, it caught my attention, sir, especially coming out of that area at that time of night.
Okay, what time of night was it?
I knew you were going to ask that, and I want to say...
Dark. Was it dark?
Yes, sir, it was dark, later than midnight.
Yeah, that's all I care about. At 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, doesn't matter, it's dark. So there's not many cars on the road at that time anyway?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, when they slow down, do you go into the center turn lane to wait for them to come up to get behind them, or do you just slow down and wait for them to pass you?
I slowed down, and it happened very quickly. It's just a common maneuver we do. I slowed down. Once they got past me, I pulled behind them. Yes, sir.
Okay, you pull behind them, and so at that point in time, given how little traffic there was, I think it's fair to say a normal person would think they might be getting ready to get pulled over. Is that fair to say? Would you think if you had pulled out of Hometown Suites and you slowed down, the officer slowed all the way down and got behind you at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, it's only you and the other car, we about to get pulled over? Is that a reasonable assumption?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, good. So we're about to get pulled over. Before any blue lights come on, I'm assuming your window and your vehicle's down, right?
Yes, sir.
And you're able to smell marijuana coming from the car, is that right?
That's correct, sir.
And for whatever reason, I had pictured in my mind a bunch of cars, but this is the only car on the road at the time when you get behind the car, is that right?
There was one more car, but that's why I continued to follow your car. We passed that other car. That car turned off just to confirm. I'm sorry, I don't mean to say your car, sir.
It's fine. Judge, listen, the judge knows that there's no odor of marijuana coming out of my car, even if I might be in Lawrenceville at 2 in the morning. I'm probably working, I'm probably sober. It's fine. The judge understands. So you get behind my client's vehicle.
Yes, sir. And after that other vehicle had turned off, I continued to observe the odor and confirm that it was coming from that vehicle. Once we entered that split there where you come under the bridge and Pike Street turns into Krogan, and we were the only vehicle. I continued to smell the odor, and that's the time I was observing their driving habits to make sure that the subject wasn't under the influence in a less safe condition.
When the vehicle makes a left onto Culver Street, did you blue light it then or did you just turn?
I turned as well, sir, to continue to observe the driving habits.
When they make another left off of Culver Street, are the blue lights on or do you just make the turn?
As soon as I make the turn and see that they enter the center lane instead of the left lane, that was the second violation I observed for failure to maintain lane. That's when I activated my blue lights and the vehicle had eventually stopped in the taxiderm's parking lot.
Okay, good. Now, when they made the left onto Culver Street, that's one way each direction, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, 3 in the morning. There's no other cars there.
No,
Are
I'm
you?
sorry, Culver's not a one-way, Culver's a two-way street.
Culver's
sir.
a two-way street, one lane each way.
That's correct, sir.
One lane
Yes, sir.
each way. And so when the vehicle makes a left on the Culver Street, does the vehicle then go immediately into the right lane?
It had crossed the double yellow barely. It was continuing to do the same driving habits. It had gone into the correct travel lane. However, that I didn't view that as an infraction due to the fact that it's a pretty common occurrence of somebody to crest that double yellow turning onto there.
Because it's
however,
a tight corner.
yes, sir. That's not what I noted as a failure to maintain lane, though.
Okay, it's a tight corner, and I don't know if the judge's familiarity. It's a tight corner with the new construction of the new bank right there. Is that right? That's a tight corner. That's not a corner I've ever made a left and been in the right lane when I make that left. Because
I'm not going to argue with you, sir. But like I stated, that's not an infraction that I noted.
Okay, I got it. So when they're on Culver, they make the next left. I know that next left at the light, right there at the florist, puts you in 3 lanes there.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
right? Okay, good. And then when they make that left, they go into the middle lane.
That's correct, sir.
They go into the middle
on
lane.
the middle lane. Yes, sir.
Okay, good. And now you blue lighting them at this point in time because of both the odor of marijuana and what you perceive to be the infractions. Is that right?
Correct. There was a failure to maintain lane coming into the split at the where Krogan meets Pike. They had come over the dotted line there,
Okay.
as well as the not going to the leftmost outer lane while entering upon a roadway.
Okay, and you've already seen 4 people in the vehicle. So you call for backup before you get out the vehicle?
No, sir. I believe another officer was headed to the noise complaint and heard my traffic about how the vehicle was driving. So they also assumed that it might possibly be a DUI stop as well.
Okay.
So I believe they were headed to me.
When you blue light the vehicle pulled over because the distance between that left at the light and the taxidermist is what? What's that distance? 2 football fields?
Yes, sir. That's a good assumption, I would say.
Okay. So they pulled over within that space, and then do you exit the vehicle or did you wait for the other backup officer to arrive?
So the way that the vehicle had stopped, the suspect vehicle or subject's vehicle had stopped was they had pulled into the parking lot and paralleled them, or I'm not going to say parallel, I apologize, they perpendicular to themselves. They had pulled in and positioned themselves at a tactical advantage to myself.
Okay.
So that time I was calling backup, and I could clearly see there were 5 subjects. Everybody was moving around, and I was placed in a very unsafe position.
Okay, and it's 2, 3 in the morning. Did you wait for backup to come before you exited your vehicle?
No, sir.
Okay, so you exit your vehicle, you're given instructions, but I'm assuming then that you know that the other officer's on his way. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir. They were coming due to the fact that I did articulate over the radio of how they parked their vehicle. Yes, sir.
All right. The car itself, do you know who it was registered to?
I believe Mr. Elam's sister.
Mr. Elam's sister. Mr. Elam's driving, the female's in the front seat, 3 black males in the back seat. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
1 gun is found underneath the front passenger seat where the female is sitting. Another gun is found on the floorboard in the back. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Although there's a lot of moving around, you don't see my client handing anybody any gun. Is that right?
No, sir. At that time, I didn't observe anybody handing anybody anything at that time. The time to stop. I gave pretty clear verbal commands for everybody to stop moving due to the fact that I wasn't in an unsafe position.
Okay, and I'm really talking about before you gave anybody any commands as people were moving around. You didn't see my client hand anybody a gun or receive any gun for anybody. Is that fair to say?
No, sir. I can't swear to the fact that I would see your client hand anybody a gun. No, sir.
Okay, Mr. Wisdom, you indicated that he was sitting in the back. Mr. Wisdom had some pills up his rectum, but you didn't see him put them up his rectum, did you? You didn't see that?
No, sir.
He just indicated that they were there.
Yes, sir. At the jail, he did. Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you're asking what's going on, nobody wants to say anything at 2, 3 in the morning, but they all start griping when it's time to get in the handcuffs and go into the jail. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Everybody wants somebody else to take it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then they start negotiating. How about who has the least amount on their criminal history? How about you take it? That's what they're doing out there in the road at 2 in the morning.
Yes, sir.
Is this all captured on the body cam?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. Marijuana. You found marijuana on my client's person, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you found marijuana on at least 2 of the other folks that were in the vehicle. Is that right?
Not on them, but near them, yes, sir.
Near them. And it appeared that the marijuana as packaged was, let us call it packaged from the same place. Is that fair to say? That's the way it appeared?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I'm just trying to figure out, because if I understand you correctly, the way you wrote up the warrants was, there's 3 packs of marijuana which are going to be sold either by one individual or multiple individuals in the car, rather than draw it up as they went to the hotel and each purchased from somebody else their own personal use of marijuana. That's the way you wrote it up. Is that fair to say? Like they were selling as opposed to they all purchased from the same place. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay, the only reason I asked that, was there any indication that they were selling as opposed to they had gone over to the hotel and each individually, Mr. Elam, Mr. Wilson, and somebody else purchased marijuana from somebody else that had bagged it up similarly? Is there any indication that did happen?
Okay, you
I'm
picked
sorry,
up a little bit there.
I'm sorry, Judge. Did I break up?
Yes, you did.
I'm sorry, I'll repeat the question. The question, officer, is obviously there are 3 separate bags of marijuana in 3 different locations, and they appear to be bagged up the same way, correct?
Yes, sir.
The way you drew it up is my client by himself or with others in the car were co-conspiring to sell that marijuana, as opposed to 3 of the people in the car made a purchase from somebody else, say at the hometown suite, of 3 individual people buying marijuana. That's the way you wrote it up. Is that right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Was there any indication that three of the folks in the vehicle had made individual purchases from somebody else that had bagged it up that way? Was there any indication that it didn't happen that way, as opposed to the interpretation that you put on it?
Well, the situation, the reason I charged it that way, sir, and I'm going to give two reasons. One being the fact that your client did have a large quantity of money in different denominations, 5s, 10s, 20s, in an amount of money that he was not accurate about how much he had, as well as facing the charges that they were facing. I feel as though if somebody did just purchase a misdemeanor amount of marijuana, that would have been an utterance that came out. However, that was never commented.
Okay, fair enough. There was a scale in the vehicle, correct?
Yes, sir, there was.
And I know that I didn't know when I first started, but I know that sometimes when people buy marijuana, they real persnippety and they like to weigh the marijuana when they buy it. You know that now, right?
Yes, sir, I do.
It sounds crazy to me, but it is what it is. And my client had indicated to you that they were smoking earlier, so that there's no question that there are people that are in the car that use marijuana. Is that fair to say?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, so I want to talk about these salts a little bit. I don't know if this is a name. You call them Adderall pills, and every day I'm learning Adderall pills, so I'm assuming it's like a pill of Adderall. Is that right?
Yes, sir. The generic version or chemical compound is amphetamine salts. That's
Okay, so is that just another name, or do they crush the pill to make it into a salt?
No, sir. That's just the name. That's the
Okay.
chemical compound name.
I'm just trying to learn. I just don't know. I just don't know. So there are some pills that are up Mr. Wilson's rectum, but there's also some other pills I think that are underneath the female's seat. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
How many pills are underneath the female's seat?
Like I stated before, I don't have the evidence printout directly in front of me. I apologize. I did not prepare properly from a long hour.
Listen, we go with ranges. Were there more Adderall pills up Wilson's butt or underneath the seat of the female?
No, there's more under the seat, sir.
Okay, more under the seat. Okay, that's really what I wanted to know. Okay, and everyone in the car was arrested. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my client didn't have any pills on him, and the other two black males in the back didn't have any pills on them. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, got the guns. Okay, all right, good. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ahn. Thank you, Judge.
Attorney Ahn.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Lawrence has gone through very thoroughly, so I'll confine myself to some of the drugs that were found with the 5 occupants. Officer, I believe you said there were about at least 3 instances of marijuana that was found, three bags?
Yes, sir.
Okay. One was with the driver, Mr. Elam. Another one was one that Mr. Wisdom dropped as he was getting out of the vehicle. And the third bag being just in the floorboard of the back seat?
Front seat, sir.
Of the front seat, okay. At the passenger side or driver's side or somewhere in the middle?
Passenger side, sir.
Okay, where kind of the female occupant was sitting, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the amphetamine salts that we were talking about, obviously one, was it Mr. Kofi or Mr. Wisdom that had it up his keister?
Mr. Wisdom?
Okay, it was one with Mr. Wisdom, which was a lesser amount, and there was a larger amount under the front passenger seat where the female occupant was sitting, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I think it was your testimony that the contraband that were found under the seats that were more or less accessible by everybody in the vehicle, and no one person was particularly more. They were more accessible to any one person, but they were more or less equally accessible. Is that your testimony?
I would say that they were accessible to the majority of the subjects. Yes, to majority of the subjects, they are accessible.
Okay. When you say
I'm not sure how easily accessible, but they are accessible to the majority of the subjects.
And when you say the majority, you're necessarily leaving somebody out, and who would that person be?
I'm sorry, sir, what was that?
When you say it's mostly accessible to most of the people in the vehicle, you're obviously leaving somebody out as not as accessible. Who are you? Who is that person?
I'm not leaving. I'm just saying the total amount of objects. Each object would be equally accessible to an individual in the vehicle. Yes, sir.
But perhaps more accessible to certain people than the others?
Well, obviously, if it was at the subject's feet, then yes, it would be easily accessible to that subject.
All right. I believe my client, Mr. Holsey, was searched subsequent to him being taken out of the vehicle. Was any contraband found on him?
No, sir.
Okay. Was any large amount of cash or suspicious amount of cash found on Mr. Holsey?
No, sir.
Any items that could be used in drug sales, such as scales, empty baggies, and such, while they're not individually illegal, were they found on Mr. Holsey?
Multiple cell phones. That's about it, sir.
Okay. How many cell phones did Mr. Holsey have?
I believe he claimed ownership to 2 cell phones.
Okay. Were they seized?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. Excuse me. Let me open my notes. Now, I think you mentioned that the hometown studio, it's a location where complaints of drug transactions and such that come in fairly often. On that particular night, did you find out before or even subsequent to that any complaints about drug transaction happening on or near that location? location?
I would have to go back and look at how many traffic stops were done in the area. We take a lot of drugs off of subjects in misdemeanor amounts that come out of that area in traffic infractions, also due to the fact that we do have flock system cameras there now to capture vehicle tags that will alert us to infractions.
But as far as any, concerned citizen complaints or something similar to that, complaining about drug transactions that they had observed happening out in the open, do you recall anything about that on that particular night, before or even after?
No, sir, I can't swear to that. I don't recall that night. No, sir.
As far as you're concerned, that night no different from any other nights then?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And I'm sure I've heard, but I don't remember. One firearm, I believe, was found under the driver's seat, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Where was the firearm found?
A firearm was found in the floorboard of the back seat, as well as one was located under the passenger seat.
Passenger seat. Okay, I get confusing. All right. And I believe you said that both were loaded.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, they're seized, and you don't know at this point whether or not they're stolen or any further information on those guns, right?
I don't believe either one was stolen, sir. I believe I would have been notified by that at that time.
Okay. Second. Now, I have a note about the glass jar. Is that the glass jar where the amphetamine salt under the passenger seat? Is that where the amphetamine salt was found in?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Any redirect from the state?
I did have one question. Officer, you mentioned that these two defendants were felons at the time. Was there any reason you did not take warrants for possession of the firearm by a convicted felon?
Yes, ma'am. I didn't know if there would be further interviews either from our detectives or from your office in reference to see if anybody wanted to discuss possession or ownership of the firearms.
Okay.
At that point, then the charge would have been tacked on. I didn't want to unfairly charge that until that was finalized.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Any further
Yes,
cross-exam from Mr. Lewis or?
No, thank you, Judge.
I don't
Okay.
have anything.
Okay. Any argument? I'm sorry. Any other evidence from the state?
Nothing further.
Any evidence from defense?
Judge, no evidence, only argument.
Okay.
Only argument, Judge.
Okay. All right. Mr. Lewis, go ahead.
Judge, respectfully, my client has 5 charges. I'm not really worried about the improper lane change. I'm going to start with the pills. Obviously, maybe you can say my client had constructive possession of the pills that are in Mr. Wilson's rectum. I've never heard that argument before. I hope I don't hear that argument from the prosecutor today. Whatever's in Mr. Wilson's body, that's Mr. Wilson's. The other pills are underneath the seat with the female, and I don't even think there's even any hint that my client, had a few pills in his pocket and he gave them then to the female who put it under her seat. So we would argue respectfully, Judge, even though the car may be registered to my client's sister, that the pills that are with Mr. Wilson, they're Mr. Wilson's, and the pills that are with the females, there's no indication that my client knew anything about any pills. My client does admit to the officer, this is the testimony here at the prelim, that they smoke earlier. So he can't say he doesn't smoke, he smokes. The officer gives a very interesting interpretation. I don't say it's wrong, I'm just saying it's just a different interpretation than I give. My interpretation is 3 people went, my client and 2 other people went up to meet the plug. The plug sold them each individual amounts of a misdemeanor amount of marijuana, and then they left. They weighed the marijuana on the scale, so put the scale on them, and then they left. There's no reason to believe that they were at Spanky's house and they would break it down a quarter pound and then they broke it down and put it into similar baggies, and that's why. And then each individual person is carrying an individual baggie, but they're going to sell it all together. That's I think that's an unreasonable interpretation. I respect the officer, the fact that he made that interpretation, but I think that's an unreasonable interpretation. And if I understand the law correctly, an alternative explanation, an equally plausible alternative explanation has to inure to the benefit of my client, Judge. And that's why I asked that charge of possession with intended distribution be reduced to possession as a misdemeanor. The gun becomes a carrying a concealed weapon because ultimately I'm going to argue the pill should go away as to my client, as to Mr. Wilson and the females, whatever. The pill should go away as to my client. The marijuana should be a misdemeanor. The gun should be, if anything, a carrying a concealed weapon, even though the one gun is behind on the floorboard and the other one's underneath the seat. Assuming when he's moving around, my client puts the gun down there. That's a carrying a concealed weapon. What's the scale for? I just told you we've done this long enough. I need to make sure I'm getting exactly the weed that I'm paying for. And the Department of Agriculture doesn't come out to verify the weed like they do at the QT pumps. They don't come out to verify that the weed is the correct amount of weed. So you got to get your own scale to measure the weed. So the pill should go away, as to Mr. Elam. The marijuana should be a misdemeanor. The gun, if you say that it's either constructive possession, should be a carrying a concealed weapon. The scales go with him because people that love weed like to make sure they get the right amount. And I'm not really interested in improper lane. We'll deal with that, whenever. That's my argument, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Ann.
Thank you, Your Honor. My argument really boils down to one thing, Judge. I mean, he was basically in the vehicle. That was it. There's nothing specific that would tie him to any of the drugs or the firearm in the vehicle. I understand constructive possession is a thing. I understand also this is a preliminary hearing, but I would hope that the court would require at least some evidence, some color of evidence that would show a constructive possession of it. Just him being in the vehicle, and it wasn't as if he could ride in the back. It wasn't a truck or anything like that. If it's in a vehicle, if other people just happen to have the contraband in it, just by nature of him wanting to be in the car, I mean that's really the extent of it. As far as most of I think the amphetamine salts that can be most directly be attributed to Mr. Wisdom. I agree with Mr. Lawrence that shouldn't in any way be inferred constructively or otherwise to Mr. Hosey. The other pills that were in a glass jar that was under the front, I think that's more clearly goes toward the front seat passenger than anybody in the vehicle, and least of all Mr. Hosey, who has not even a scale, not even extra cash, not extra baggies, or anything of that sort to tie him in any way aside from him sitting there in the vehicle. And I mean, I think to rule otherwise, it would mean that if anybody in that vehicle, just by the single sole virtue of being in the vehicle, has sufficiently met the probable cause burden. And I think that's a fairly excessive interpretation. The marijuana aspect of it, Your Honor, again, people with some ancillary evidence linking to that contraband is obviously Mr. Wisdom, who had it and who was observed dropping it. So, and that can't even be argued against my client, who again was simply sitting in the back of the vehicle, the only place where he could sit. If it was a choice between him walking home some distance late at night or being in the vehicle, I mean, that really shouldn't be held against him as far as him being liable in some way, even at this probable cause level, that to be charged with these felony offenses. So all those being the case, Your Honor, I would ask that all the charges in this case, the 20W13556, which is, I believe, I think that's the not the bath salts, but the amphetamine salts, the drug-related objects, which I believe, if that's the scale, then I think that's what Mr. Elam had, and the firearm and the marijuana charge. All those I asked to be dismissed against my client.
All right, what's the state's position?
Thank you, Your Honor. In this case, we do have more than merely 5 people that just happen to be in the vehicle. They're not just present in the vehicle. They are also making fervent movements in the vehicle as soon or once they expect and it looks like they're about to be pulled over, as Mr. Lawrence described. Mr. Lewis, excuse me. Continuing to make those movements as the officer approaches. The positioning and placement of all of the contraband in the vehicle, we can only assume had just been relocated by the time it's being found and searched by the officers. So we can't say exactly who would have and who could have been in easy possession of those items just prior to the stop. But where they were located, namely the glass jar, the gun, and the scales and the baggies under the passenger seat, the officer describes that could have been easily accessible from the front of that seat as well as the back of that seat. The state is not trying to attribute specifically the Adderall being possessed by Mr. Wisdom to the other occupants, or the marijuana specifically dropped. I'm sorry, I think I'm getting that confused. The Adderall specifically possessed by Mr. Colby and the marijuana dropped by Mr. Wisdom is not specifically being attributed to the others, as that possession was quite personal at the time that it was found. But all 3 of the packages of marijuana being packaged in the same way, it certainly is consistent with having come from the same place, with all 5 of these individuals obviously having just come from the same place. Although there is an alternate explanation, that does not go towards defeating probable cause. Probable cause allows for alternate explanations, but if one of the reasonable explanations is that all of the occupants could have been coming from the same place with the purpose of or having just conducted activity in distribution, then that would prevail under probable cause. This can also be more likely than the alternative explanation, with all of this lump sum of cash being held by one particular individual. You don't have all 5 of them or 3 of them having some cash in one pocket, some cash here, some cash here, but that all of the cash is being held by one individual does go to show a unitary operation by all 5, that the proceeds of the sale from everyone in the vehicle was still being held by one particular person, as opposed to multiple people conducting their own separate purchases. The other thing that we do have beyond just 5 people that happen to be in a vehicle is 5 people arguing with each other, not just about it's not mine, I don't know what you're talking about, but simply who's going to take the fall for it. 5 people acknowledging, having knowledge about generally what is being found in the vehicle and to why they're being arrested and going to jail at this point. What they choose to speak about at that moment, these spontaneous statements, speak volumes about what they knew, what was going on in the vehicle, especially given their movements to try to conceal those items just prior to interacting with the officers. So based on collectively all of the evidence and observations the officer was able to make, I believe all of the contraband in the vehicle can be attributed and as it was accessible to all of the occupants, and including both of the firearms, all 3 packages of marijuana could have been accessible by all individuals, and specifically just noting that Mr. Halsey, again, was not just an occupant, but he did have a package of marijuana, in fact, on his person. And with that, we ask that you bind over all charges.
One clarification, Judge. I believe Mr. Hosey did not have any marijuana on him. That was my recollection. If that's wrong, please correct me.
Judge, I trust that you remember the evidence. I mean, Wilson was the one that had the pills in his rectum.
Mr. Elam, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I trust that you. My client has some marijuana in his pocket. I trust that you heard the evidence, Judge. I don't have any further argument.
Okay. All right, with respect to Mr. Halsey, he was in the back seat, and there was marijuana in the back seat. That's my understanding of the testimony. On the floorboard, in the back seat. I do find possession of marijuana, but only for a misdemeanor amount. I'm dismissing the possession of a firearm for Mr. Halsey. The possession of a drug-related object, I am dismissing that charge, and I'm dismissing the sale of the salts that were in the front seat with respect to Mr. Halsey. So he has a misdemeanor charge. With respect to Mr. Elam, he's got the possession of the marijuana and failure to maintain lane. I am going to bind it over on the amphetamines because those are both in the front seat area. He's the driver and also the passenger.
Judge, are you binding it over as possession or possession with intent or sale? I mean, it's down as a
Just possession.
possession. Okay.
Just possession because the officer going to testify. I wasn't sure about the amount. Just possession.
Okay.
And then on the, so that would, the possession of the firearm, again, it's in the front seat. I'm binding that over. The failure to maintain lane and possession of a drug-related object. In terms of the marijuana, my understanding, in terms of the amount of marijuana, I didn't hear testimony other than they all have similar bags and that there's a scale, correct? And so I'm going to, because there's a drug-related object, there is the one item, it is going to be possession with the intent to distribute on the marijuana.
Can we be heard on the issue of bond?
Yes.
Because I'm going to be asking for a $3,500 bond. Do you have an objection to that, Ms. Bakari?
One moment.
And I don't have any objection to her, just if she does have an objection, letting you know what his GCIC says, Judge.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and review that. Looks like, as far as I can tell, he has a pending case under first offender for possession with intent, marijuana, possession of firearm during felony out of Newton County. Looks like he has an open case of possession of Schedule 1, MDMA, possession of firearm during felony out of Atlanta, and an open case of misdemeanor fail violence battery, simple battery, disorderly, convictions for fail violence battery, disorderly conduct out of DeKalb, and then this case, we would leave on to the court.
Okay.
The If I may ask, Judge, the last open case is out of what county, Ms. Bakari?
So the only open case appears to be out of Atlanta.
Atlanta.
Yes.
The open case out of Atlanta, and he was arrested on that offense when?
May 2017.
Okay, so that's probably closed, Judge. I mean, obviously, if she says May 2020, we're going to have a different conversation, or even May 2019. We all know, and I know the court knows, Fulton County is sort of slow, but they're not so slow that 3.5 years later, that case would still be open. I suspect that's a case that just hasn't been reported yet, Judge, but I'll leave that to the court's discretion. Judge, respectfully, my client is 26 years old. He doesn't have any holds out of Fulton County or anything else. He's 26 years old. He intends to be living down in Atlanta. I have an address for him of 1359 Lockwood Drive. He has I'm gonna call it a catering business that he's trying to sort of get up off the ground. He has a daughter that he takes care of, and so we're going to ask the court to consider a bond at the amount of $3,500. Obviously, a stay away from all of these folks that are named that were arrested with him. I don't think he has any need to be with anybody. I don't think that anybody in the car is a relative or he has any significant relationship with anybody. Obviously, he can't possess any guns or be around any guns, and he's not to consume any drugs. And the court can put also and alcohol ultimately, but he just needs to. He's been sitting in jail for at least 3 weeks. So I'm going to respectfully ask that the court consider a bond amount of $3,500.
And the court is going to order an aggregate bond for Miss Antonia Elam in the amount of $5,000.
Yes, Judge.
For Halsey, all he has left is the misdemeanor charge. So, and I believe he already has a bond on that one. It's the court's decision. We're going to just take 2 minutes, but we're going to do Charles Young next.
Thank you, Judge.
3 witnesses. And ADA, just give me an indication of which officer you want me to call first.